They didn't switch sides because they suddenly became good people. They switched sides because the truth got too loud to ignore. Read that again. Because this is exactly what's happening right now. The same people who doubted you, questioned you, whispered behind your back, or quietly sided with the wrong person are suddenly nodding along like they always believed in you. Not because you begged, not because you explained yourself, but because reality caught up and it dragged the truth into the light without asking for permission. This situation is like watching a cheap magician panic when the lights turn on. For a while, the tricks worked, the misdirection worked, the lies felt convincing in the dark. But once the room is fully lit, there's nothing mystical left. Just shaky hands, exposed wires, and an audience realizing they were played. That's what exposure looks like. Quiet at first, then undeniable. Here's the part that should settle your nerves. Studies on social behavior show that people don't actually change their stance when new information appears. They wait until it's socially safe to admit they were wrong. That's why validation always comes late. That's why support shows up after the damage is done. And that's why you're not crazy for feeling like this shift came out of nowhere. It didn't. It was building the whole time. So if you felt that strange moment where people suddenly treat you with respect, or where the narrative flipped without you saying a word, you're not imagining things. You were right. You always were. The universe has a funny way of correcting stories when they drift too far from the truth. And thank you, chosen one, for being here. If this message is hitting home, don't forget to pay it back by simply pressing like and subscribing. Not for ego, not for numbers, but to help spread this message to more people who are quietly going through the same thing. This isn't about noise, it's about balance. Thanks for being part of this mission. You're not alone in it. You're part of a force that doesn't need permission to exist. Now let's come back to what's really going on here. What you're experiencing right now is vindication in real time. Not the loud, dramatic kind people fantasize about, not applause, not apologies. It's subtler than that. It's people changing their tone. It's hesitation where confidence used to be. It's silence from someone who used to speak too freely. It's the universe quietly moving the spotlight away from you and onto the person who caused the damage. And here's the uncomfortable truth for the enemy in this story. Exposure doesn't arrive as punishment. It arrives as consequence. Sociopathic behavior survives on confusion, divided opinions, and plausible deniability. Once clarity enters the room, the game collapses. Not because someone attacked them, but because their patterns became visible. That's why this feels sudden. One day you're misunderstood. The next day, people are asking questions. The next, they're distancing themselves from the very person they once defended. This isn't coincidence. This is what happens when lies are forced to coexist with facts for too long. You didn't win by arguing. You didn't win by proving anything. You won by staying consistent while someone else couldn't keep their mask straight. That's the part most people don't understand. Vindication doesn't reward the loudest voice. It rewards the steadiest one. And let's be clear about something. The reason everyone seems to be on your side now isn't because you suddenly became more likable. It's because the truth became unavoidable. Humans follow certainty. When the fog clears, they naturally gravitate toward the solid ground. Right now, that ground is you. This can feel confusing, even bittersweet. Part of you may want acknowledgement. Another part may feel disgusted by how quickly people switched up. Both reactions are valid. What matters is that you don't let this moment pull you out of your center. This isn't the time to explain your story. It's the time to let reality finish telling it for you. What's happening to the other person is exposure without theatrics. Their inconsistencies are stacking up. their behavior no longer matches their words. People are noticing the patterns you spotted long ago, and once a pattern is seen, it can't be unseen. That's the beginning of the end for manipulation. This is why the universe often waits before tipping the scales. If justice arrived too early, people would doubt it. If it arrived too loudly, it would look forced. But when it arrives quietly, through observation and realization, it sticks. This moment is sticking. You're not being validated because you demanded it. You're being validated because the truth outlasted the performance. And before we go any further, let me say this clearly. I love you, truly. I hope the rest of this year brings you peace, stability, and momentum. I hope something unexpectedly good finds you before the year ends, because if you made it this far, you didn't do it by accident. Don't let anyone rewrite that truth. This year tested everyone, maybe not with explosions, but with pressure, with discomfort, with moments that forced growth. And you survived it. You adapted, you learned restraint, you learned timing. Now you're watching the results unfold. So take a breath, reset where you need to, start the next chapter early instead of waiting for permission. And remember this feeling, not the revenge, not the satisfaction, but the calm certainty of knowing you were right, and knowing you didn't have to destroy anyone to prove it. This message isn't about celebrating someone else's downfall. It's about recognizing your alignment. The universe doesn't miss details, and right now, it's correcting a story that was never meant to end the way it started. And before we go any further, Chosen One, pause for just a second. The fact that you're still here already says something about you. Most people click away the moment things get real, but you didn't. That's because something inside you recognizes this moment. You're watching the tables turn in real time, watching truth rise while manipulation collapses, and you can feel that this message isn't random. If this is resonating, support it in the simplest way possible. Like the video, subscribe, and let the algorithm do what the universe is already doing, pushing truth where it needs to go. If you want to anchor this moment, drop a comment with 777 as a signal that you see the shift and you're ready to understand why it's happening. And if you're able to support the team behind this message through super thanks, do it. Not because of money, but because clarity takes effort, and effort deserves fuel. Even the smallest support keeps this mission moving. Now stay with me, because from here on out, we're breaking this down step by step. If you are truly aligned with this moment, you'll feel the pull to listen all the way through. This is where things start making sense. Let's get into it. Number 1, you called it a joke because you didn't think you'd ever get caught. Cruelty always hides behind humor until the bill shows up. That's the part they never prepare for, the moment when laughter stops working as camouflage. At first, everything they did to you was framed like entertainment, a joke, a comment, a harmless move. They laughed, others laughed, and you were expected to swallow it with a smile so they could feel clever. But now that the damage is visible, now that people are finally connecting dots, the tone has changed. Suddenly, it wasn't that serious. Suddenly, you're being told to relax. Suddenly, they're minimizing what they were bold enough to do when they thought nobody would question them. Let's call this what it actually is. When someone hurts you, crosses boundaries, humiliates you, or sabotages you, and then hides behind humor, that's not comedy. That's cowardice wearing a clown mask. A real joke ends when people stop laughing. What they did kept going long after the smile faded. That's not funny. That's intentional. Here's a metaphor that fits perfectly. Imagine someone keeps pushing another person near the edge of a cliff, laughing every time they stumble. When the person finally slips and gets hurt, the pusher throws their hands up and says, "Relax, I was just playing." Nobody buys that, because everyone knows if it were truly harmless, there wouldn't be blood on the ground. That's exactly what's happening now. The consequences showed up, and suddenly the joke needs a rewrite. What makes this even more disturbing is the confusion they display when you react. They act shocked that you're upset. They pretend not to understand why there's anger, distance, or confrontation. That confusion isn't innocence, it's a lack of empathy. When someone can't recognize harm unless it happens to them, that's a serious red flag. And now other people are starting to notice it too. This is where chosen ones often start questioning themselves. You might be asking, did I overreact? Was I too sensitive? Should I have just let it slide? No. Those thoughts are leftovers from gaslighting. Healthy people don't have to convince others that harm was harmless. Only manipulators do that. If it truly wasn't a big deal, they wouldn't be scrambling to downplay it now. Here's a hard truth that hits the enemy right where it hurts. People who rely on jokes to hurt others panic when those jokes are taken seriously. Why? Because seriousness exposes intent. Humor was their shield. Without it, their behavior stands naked and ugly in the open. That's why they're uncomfortable right now. That's why they're being careful with their words. That's why the room feels different when their name comes up. You didn't suddenly become too much. The situation finally became clear. Think of it like this. A person keeps poking a bruise, laughing every time you flinch. Then one day, the bruise swells, turns dark, and needs medical attention. The poking stops immediately, and suddenly they claim they didn't know it was that bad. But the damage didn't appear overnight. It was built through repeated careless harm. That's what people are starting to understand about what you went through. And here's where the universe steps in quietly, not dramatically. Patterns always expose themselves. Someone who treats pain like entertainment can only hide for so long. Eventually, their lack of boundaries becomes obvious. Eventually, others experience the same behavior. Eventually, the joke stops landing. That's when the shift happens. Not because you demanded justice, but because reality made denial impossible. This is also why the enemy looks smaller now. When they were joking, they looked confident. When they're explaining, minimizing, and backtracking, they look weak. Power doesn't need excuses. Truth doesn't need editing. The moment someone starts saying, "You misunderstood," what they really mean is, "You noticed." You might also be wondering why people didn't step in sooner, why it took so long for anyone to say something. That's because social comfort often beats moral clarity. People stay quiet until silence becomes risky. And now, staying silent would mean siding with behavior that's clearly wrong. So the alignment changes, not out of bravery, but out of self-preservation. Still, the result benefits you. Let this part sink in. The exposure isn't happening because you spoke louder. It's happening because they couldn't stop themselves. Sociopathic behavior doesn't know when to quit. It escalates, it repeats, it leaves tracks. And once enough tracks are visible, the story writes itself. There's a reason they're trying to rewrite history now. They're hoping to downgrade the crime to a prank. They're hoping people forget how far it went. They're hoping you doubt your own experience. Don't. Jokes don't require apologies. Jokes don't leave scars. Jokes don't force people to rebuild their sense of safety. This moment is motivation for you, not just validation. You stayed composed while someone else showed their lack of control. You absorbed pressure while they revealed their character. That's why you're being taken seriously now. Not because you complained, but because you endured without becoming ugly yourself. And let's be honest, Part of you always knew this day would come. You saw the lack of empathy early. You felt the imbalance. You noticed how they laughed at things that shouldn't be funny. You didn't have proof back then. Now you don't need it. The proof is walking around explaining itself. This is the shift. The moment where their words lose weight and yours gain gravity. The moment where it was just a joke stops working as an escape hatch. The moment where chosen ones realize they weren't weak for feeling hurt. They were perceptive. So don't soften your memory of what happened. Don't minimize it just because others are finally acknowledging it. Let the truth stand at full size. The universe doesn't reward cruelty forever, and it doesn't rush clarity either. But when clarity arrives, it's thorough. They laughed when they thought it was safe. Now they're quiet because it's not. And that's silence. That's not peace. That's exposure settling in. Number 2. You didn't just lie. You pulled a pin and walked away smiling. A lie becomes lethal the moment it starts playing with someone's future. That's the line they crossed, whether they admit it or not. This wasn't a small exaggeration. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't gossip that got out of hand. This was a calculated lie with reach. The kind of lie that doesn't just bruise feelings, but threatens stability. The kind that messes with relationships, careers, finances, and reputation. The kind that can quietly erase opportunities someone worked years to build. And the scariest part, they treated it like entertainment. Imagine this: someone loosens the bolts on your car and then walks away whistling. You don't crash immediately, so they tell themselves it's harmless. But the danger was planted the moment they touched it. That's what this lie was. A delayed impact move. They didn't need to see the explosion to be responsible for setting it up. They knew exactly what they were doing. People don't accidentally tell lies that detailed. They don't slip up into narratives that conveniently paint them as innocent and you as unstable, untrustworthy, or problematic. Lies like this are designed, crafted, aimed, and once released, they're hard to pull back. That's why this feels so heavy, because it wasn't careless, it was reckless. Here's a quote that cuts straight through the noise. If someone is willing to gamble with your name, they were never playing fair. Your name isn't a toy. Your reputation isn't collateral. Your livelihood isn't something someone gets to experiment with for amusement or control. You might be asking yourself right now, how could anyone go that far? The answer is uncomfortable but important. Some people don't see consequences the way others do. They see reactions, not damage. They enjoy influence, not responsibility. And when they lie, they're not thinking about the fallout. They're thinking about the momentary power they gain from being believed. Imagine this again. A person lights a match in a dry forest just to watch the flame dance, fully assuming someone else will put it out. When the fire spreads, they claim they didn't mean it. But intent doesn't erase impact. And now, the smoke is visible from miles away. This is why the shift you're seeing now feels so intense. People are realizing how far the lie traveled. They're realizing what could have happened. For some, it already did. Missed chances, strained relationships, lost trust. Once people understand that level of risk was involved, they stop laughing. They stop defending. They start distancing. Another truth the enemy hates. A lie that threatens someone's future eventually exposes the person who told it. Because lies this big require maintenance. They need follow-up lies. They need explanations. They need people to keep pretending nothing serious happened. That's exhausting. And sooner or later, cracks show. You didn't imagine the danger. You didn't overreact. You didn't dramatize the situation. You recognized the threat because you live in the real world, where words have consequences. That's why this hit you so deeply. You understood what was at stake. Imagine someone forging your signature and laughing it off as a prank. The bank doesn't see it that way. The law doesn't see it that way. Reality doesn't see it that way. Lies that involve trust, credibility, or livelihood stop being jokes the moment they leave someone vulnerable. Here's another quote that lands hard. People who lie about you will always underestimate how seriously the universe takes truth. Correction doesn't come instantly, but it comes thoroughly. You may also be wondering why this lie didn't collapse immediately, why it took time. Lies like this don't explode on impact. They poison slowly. That's how they survive. They hide in uncertainty. They linger in maybe. But the longer they exist, the more damage they cause, and the more obvious their source becomes. This person likely believed they were smarter than the system, smarter than you, smarter than everyone else. They assumed they could control the story indefinitely. What they didn't account for is pattern recognition. Humans eventually notice inconsistencies. Stories stop lining up. Timelines don't match. Reactions don't fit the facts. Imagine a house built on cardboard foundations. It might stand for a while if no one leans on it, but the moment pressure is applied, it folds. That's what's happening now. Pressure arrived. Questions were asked, and the lie couldn't hold its shape. This is also where chosen ones often struggle internally. You might be thinking, why me? Why was I the target? The answer isn't weakness, it's proximity. You were close enough to matter, visible enough to be relevant, strong enough to be perceived as a threat. Lies are rarely aimed at people who don't matter. Another quote to lock this in: nobody risks this much to lie about someone insignificant. Let that settle. What makes this the final straw is repetition. This wasn't their first time playing with truth. It's just the first time it backfired this hard. People like this test boundaries repeatedly, escalating each time they get away with it. With you, the escalation went too far. Too many people were affected. Too many lines were crossed. Imagine a gambler who keeps doubling down because they've never lost before. Eventually, the table turns, and when it does, the loss is catastrophic. That's the moment we're in now. The universe doesn't interrupt every bad move. It waits until the lesson sticks. You're seeing vindication, not because someone felt sorry for you, but because the risk became undeniable. People are realizing that if this lie could do that to you, it could do it to them. Self-preservation kicks in. Alliances shift. Silence breaks. Here's the last quote for this section, and it's for you. Truth doesn't rush, but it never misses. What's happening now isn't luck, it's alignment. The lie went too far, not emotionally, practically. It endangered real things, and once reality is threatened, reality responds, quietly, firmly, permanently. You didn't have to expose them. Their own behavior did that for you, and that's the most brutal part for the enemy. They weren't defeated by confrontation. They were undone by consequence. This isn't about revenge, it's about correction, and correction has already begun. Number 3. Polished on the outside, hollow on the inside. And now everyone can see it. An image can be edited. Character eventually edits itself in public. That's the nightmare they're living through right now. This person didn't build their life on substance. They built it on angles, lighting, timing, and perception. How they looked mattered more than who they were. Status mattered more than integrity. Applause mattered more than truth. For a long time that worked because the people closest to them made excuses. They saw the flaws, the manipulative streaks, the lack of empathy, but ignored it because it didn't hit them directly. Silence felt easier than accountability. Imagine a house with a perfect exterior, freshly painted, spotless windows, manicured lawn. Everyone compliments it from the street. But inside, the walls are rotting, the foundation is cracked, and the floors creak under the smallest weight. That house doesn't collapse during good weather. It collapses when pressure shows up. That's exactly what's happening now. Here's a fact people don't like to admit. Image-focused people survive only as long as their behavior stays private. The moment patterns become visible to strangers, the illusion dies fast. Public space has no loyalty. It doesn't care how charming someone is in person. It reacts to receipts, consistency, and repetition. You might be wondering, why is this blowing up now? Because exposure doesn't need permission once it leaves the inner circle. What used to be whispered is now being noticed. What used to be dismissed as drama is now being labeled as behavior. And once behavior is named, it spreads. Imagine someone carefully curating a highlight reel for years, then accidentally handing people the raw footage. No filters, no edits, no spin, just reality. That's terror for someone who survives on perception, because they can't control how strangers interpret the truth. Another quote that cuts deep. People obsessed with image panic when the audience stops clapping. Right now, the applause is fading, not because of hate, but because people are thinking. This is also where chosen ones start to feel vindicated. You saw through the shine early. You noticed the emptiness behind the performance. You felt the disconnect between words and actions. You didn't have proof back then, just instinct. Now, instinct has evidence. And here's the brutal part for them. This isn't staying private. It's moving. It's being discussed. It's being shared. Once exposure reaches public awareness, it doesn't need drama to grow. Curiosity alone carries it forward. Imagine trying to stop ink once it hits water. You can't grab it back. You can only watch it spread. That's the stage they're in now. They don't fear being misunderstood. They fear being accurately understood. And the universe has a ruthless way of balancing things. It lets image carry people for a while, then introduces reality when the lesson needs to stick. This isn't revenge. This is correction. What you're seeing isn't chaos. It's alignment. Substance always outlives shine. And when character finally becomes visible, image doesn't stand a chance. Number 4. You touched the one domino they couldn't afford to move. You didn't attack the system. You revealed where it was already cracked. That's the part they can't forgive you for. They treated you like they treated everyone else at first. Same dismissiveness, same manipulation, same quiet disrespect wrapped in confidence. They assumed you would absorb it, adapt to it, maybe even blame yourself like others did. That's how their pattern survived for so long. Most people bend. Most people doubt themselves. Most people back off to keep the peace. You didn't. And that's where everything went wrong for them. Imagine a building with hidden structural damage. It looks fine until one person leans on the wrong wall. Not harder than anyone else. Not aggressively, just honestly. And suddenly, the cracks appear. The collapse doesn't happen because of force. It happens because the weakness was already there. You were that moment. Here's the truth they don't want to say out loud. The person who exposes the flaw always gets blamed more than the flaw itself. Because it's easier to hate the mirror than to fix what's reflected. You didn't expose them by yelling, accusing, or proving anything. You exposed them by not reacting the way they expected, by setting boundaries, by staying consistent, by refusing to play along. That interruption forced their behavior into the open. Patterns can hide in chaos. They can't hide in clarity. You might be wondering, why did it blow up after me? Because you disrupted the cycle. Others may have noticed things, but they adapted. You didn't. You became the variable they couldn't control. And once control slips, everything starts unraveling. Imagine someone cheating the system for years, sliding through unnoticed until one honest transaction triggers an audit. Not because the honest person did something wrong, but because honesty exposes fraud by contrast. That's what you represent in this situation. Contrast. Another quote that lands hard. Some people call it betrayal when you stop protecting their lies. You didn't betray anyone. You stopped participating. What's happening now feels humiliating for them because it is. Exposure at this level doesn't just embarrass, it corners, it forces reflection, it removes escape routes. They're being pushed toward change, not because they want growth, but because the old behavior no longer works. That's a brutal place to be. And here's the final shift for you to understand. You weren't chosen to destroy them. You were chosen to end the pattern. The universe doesn't always send punishments. Sometimes it sends people who can't be manipulated. You were the catalyst because you stayed solid, and once solidity enters a fake structure, collapse is inevitable. Number 5. They didn't pull the trigger, they just loaded the gun and walked away. Silence isn't neutral when damage is happening. It's permission. That's the part most people don't want to face. What hurts almost as much as the main betrayal is realizing how many people stood nearby and watched it happen. They saw the sabotage, they heard the lies, they noticed the bullying wrapped in jokes and concern. And instead of stopping it, they adjusted their posture and stayed comfortable. Some stayed quiet, others leaned in. Either way, the harm kept moving. These weren't clueless bystanders. These were people who nodded along, people who passed information casually like it was gossip instead of a weapon. Pillow talk turned into strategy. Blogs turned into smear campaigns. Publishing whisper networks, private chats. All of it dressed up as conversation, venting, or just sharing. But intent doesn't disappear just because the tone is relaxed. Imagine a group watching someone slowly poison a well, then acting surprised when people get sick. No one poured the final cup, so everyone feels clean. But the damage still required cooperation. That's how this worked. No single villain. Just a network of small betrayals stacked on top of each other. Here's a hard quote that lands where it hurts. People who profit from cruelty love pretending they were just observers. Observation becomes participation the moment you benefit from the outcome. You might be asking yourself, why did people believe it so easily? Because casual cruelty feels believable. When harm is delivered calmly, it sounds credible. When lies are shared without emotion, people mistake confidence for truth. That's why it spread. Not because it was strong, but because it was familiar. Imagine someone passing a rumor the same way they pass salt at a table. No urgency, no concern, just habit. That's what made it dangerous. The lack of care made it feel normal. And normal things don't get questioned right away. Another quote to lock this in. The most damage is done by people who swear they meant no harm. Impact doesn't need malice to destroy. What's changing now is awareness. People are replaying their own actions in their heads, remembering what they said, what they shared, what they laughed at, and realizing how casually they helped something ugly grow. That discomfort is real. That's why some are quiet now. That's why others are defensive. You didn't just expose one person, you exposed a system of convenience, a group of people who chose comfort over character, and now that the story is public, that comfort is gone. The universe has a way of spotlighting not just the loud offender, but the quiet supporters too, because patterns don't survive scrutiny, and silence doesn't look innocent once the truth is visible. They're not scared because you're angry. They're scared because they're being seen. Number 6. You didn't overreact. You finally stopped allowing it. Distance isn't punishment. It's self-respect catching up. That's the line people misunderstand on purpose. Sometimes the deepest cut isn't the person who swung first. It's the ones who sat there, heard the noise, saw the damage, and decided it wasn't their problem. They didn't need to participate. They didn't need to speak. Their silence did the work for them, and once you see that clearly, there's no unseeing it. Imagine someone standing in their own house while a guest keeps breaking things, insulting you, crossing lines. The owner notices. They say nothing. Later, they shrug and claim they didn't want conflict. That's not neutrality. That's choosing comfort over safety. And when you finally walk out, they act confused about why you're done. Here's a quote that cuts clean. If someone can watch you be disrespected and stay comfortable, they were never on your side. That realization hurts because it rewrites the past. You start replaying moments in your head, the times you felt off, the pauses that lasted too long, the lack of protection where there should have been loyalty. And the questions come fast. What else did they allow? What did they hear and not tell you? What did they excuse because it didn't affect them? That spiral isn't paranoia. It's pattern recognition finally turning on. Another metaphor that fits. Imagine discovering that the security cameras in a building were turned off while a crime happened, and the person responsible says they didn't want to deal with paperwork. You don't argue with them. You leave the building. That's what cutting people off really is. It's not drama. It's choosing not to stay where safety isn't a priority. Here's another quote that lands hard. Loyalty isn't loud, but betrayal is never silent. If they truly had your back, you wouldn't be questioning it now. People will say you're being harsh, that you should have talked it out, that everyone makes mistakes. What they're really saying is that your boundaries inconvenience them, because when you walk away quietly, it forces them to look at their own inaction, and most people would rather criticize your reaction than confront their role. The universe doesn't punish people for staying silent. It reveals what silence costs, and once you see that cost clearly, separation becomes the only sane option. You didn't cut them off to hurt them. You cut them off because staying would have meant betraying yourself. Number 7. They called you the problem because you wouldn't blend into the lie. The black sheep isn't broken. It just exposes how fake the herd is. That's the truth people choke on. Truly chosen people rarely move smoothly inside groups, not because you're difficult, arrogant, or antisocial, but because you don't operate on autopilot. You question energy. You notice patterns. You don't automatically agree just to belong. And in spaces built on unspoken rules, that makes you dangerous without ever trying to be. You didn't do anything wrong. You weren't cruel. You weren't malicious. You didn't sabotage anyone. You simply existed without bending, and that alone was enough to make you a target. Imagine a room where everyone is whispering the same lie just to keep the peace. Then someone speaks normally, not louder, not aggressive, just honest. The room goes silent. Suddenly, that person feels disruptive, even though they didn't raise their voice. That's how the black sheep is created, not by bad behavior, but by contrast. Here's a quote that hits clean. People who live by masks hate those who don't wear one. Your presence threatened the illusion. What makes this syndrome especially unsettling is that some people can't even explain why they dislike you. They feel it, but can't name it. That discomfort comes from projection. You remind them of parts of themselves they avoid. Your clarity triggers their denial. Your boundaries expose their lack of them. Imagine a mirror in a room full of people who hate their reflection. They don't smash the wall, they smash the mirror. That's you in this story. You might have asked yourself, why am I always the odd one out? Or, why do I get blamed for things I didn't start? The answer isn't bad luck, it's role assignment. Groups under stress often sacrifice the most independent member to preserve the illusion of harmony. Scapegoating is easier than self-examination. Another quote to lock it in. Groups don't exile truth because it's wrong. They exile it because it's inconvenient. And you were inconvenient. This is why the universe often isolates chosen people early, not as punishment, but as protection. Groups that can't tolerate difference eventually turn hostile. Distance saves you before damage becomes permanent. You weren't rejected because you lacked value. You were singled out because you had it. And now, as exposure spreads and narratives collapse, the same people who questioned you are quietly realizing they misjudged the wrong person. The black sheep always makes sense in hindsight. Number 8. The universe did the accounting. You were never called to testify. When consequences arrive without your effort, that's not luck, that's alignment, and it hits harder than revenge ever could. This is the moment where it stops being funny for them. Not awkward, not uncomfortable, heavy. The kind of heavy that sits in the chest when distractions stop working. They can't spin it anymore. They can't rationalize it away. There's no one left to convince. The noise died down, and now they're alone with what they did. That's the part they never prepared for. They assumed consequences only happen when someone fights back, when someone exposes, when someone retaliates. They thought as long as you stayed quiet and kept moving, nothing would catch up. They were wrong. The universe doesn't need your participation to correct imbalance. It just needs time and pattern. Imagine throwing mud at someone walking uphill. You expect them to slip, fall, react. Instead, they keep climbing. Meanwhile, the mud slides back down and covers the thrower. That's what this is. You didn't stop to argue. You didn't stop to explain. You didn't stop to defend your name. You kept moving forward, and gravity did the rest. Here's a quote that lands clean. The strongest response is often no response at all. Because silence, paired with consistency, exposes lies faster than confrontation. They tried to ruin your reputation. That was the goal. Make people doubt you. Make doors close. Make your name feel heavy in rooms you weren't in. Instead, something else happened. People started asking questions. Stories stopped lining up. Their behavior didn't age well. Yours did. Imagine someone forging documents while you quietly keep showing up on time, delivering results, staying solid. Eventually, the forged papers don't matter. Reality audits everything. That's what's happening now. You might be wondering, why does this look so internal for them? Because the loud phase is over. This stage is reflection. This is when there's no enemy to point at, no drama to hide behind. Just memory, just awareness, just the uncomfortable realization that they caused their own collapse. Another quote that cuts deep. When you don't chase justice, justice chases balance. And balance doesn't miss. What's destroying them isn't exposure alone. It's comparison, your forward motion against their stagnation, your calm against their defensiveness, your growth against their excuses. That contrast is brutal. You didn't win by proving them wrong. You won by becoming undeniable. And that's the kind of outcome no manipulator can survive. Number 9. When the badges fall off, only character can stand upright. Status is borrowed. Character is the only thing you actually own. And right now, people are finally doing the math. This is the shift you can feel in the air. The moment when titles stop impressing, money stops protecting, and connections stop covering cracks. People are stripping away the surface and asking a much simpler question. Who is this person when none of the props are around? And for some, that question is devastating. Imagine a stage play where the set collapses mid-scene, the lights stay on, the audience is still there, but suddenly the actors have nowhere to hide. No scenery, no costumes, no script. That's what's happening now. Without status to lean on, some people are realizing there's nothing solid underneath, no integrity to fall back on, no consistency, just image trying to survive without support. Here's a quote that lands hard. Take away the crown and you'll see who actually learned to walk. A lot of people never did. You're watching people with impressive resumes, shiny possessions, and loud reputations lose credibility in real time, not because they became poor or powerless, but because their character couldn't carry the weight once attention shifted. They built everything on external validation, so when validation dried up, the structure failed. Now flip the lens. Imagine losing everything overnight. No status, no recognition, no safety net. Some people would crumble immediately. Others would stand there, bruised but intact. You're in the second group. Even without the extras, you still have discipline, boundaries, self-respect. That's why this moment is validating. You didn't need the costume to be real. Another quote to lock it in. Character is what shows up when the audience leaves. And the audience is thinning fast. You might be asking, why are people waking up now? Because stress reveals priorities. When pressure rises, people stop caring about flash and start caring about trust. They want to know who won't fold, lie, or disappear when things get uncomfortable. That's why the spotlight is moving. The universe doesn't reward shine forever. It tests substance eventually. Some people had everything and still had nothing. No integrity to anchor them, no depth to sustain them, no inner structure. And now, as the noise fades, that emptiness is visible. You, on the other hand, were built without shortcuts. Strip it all away, and you're still standing. That's not luck, that's character. Number 10. The verdict is in, and you never had to defend yourself. The truth doesn't shout, it replaces the lie and keeps moving. That's exactly what just happened. This is the moment everything quietly locks into place. Your name is clearing without you campaigning for it. The lies are collapsing under their own weight. The behavior that once hid behind confusion, charm, or noise now has a label, and people are using it openly. This isn't temporary embarrassment for them. This is their reputation settling into its final shape. And here's the part that matters most for you. You're not scrambling, you're not explaining, you're not chasing closure. You're standing on solid ground while everything around them feels unstable. That's how you know this is real vindication, not a mood swing, not sympathy, not a trend. Imagine watching a house fall apart after you already moved out. No panic, no loss, just distance and clarity. That's where you are now, safe from the damage because you stopped living inside the lie before it collapsed. Here's a quote that seals it. Vindication doesn't feel loud, it feels settled. And that calm you're feeling right now, that's alignment. They can't undo what's been seen. They can't repackage it. They can't outtalk it. People aren't arguing anymore. They're concluding, and conclusions stick. Every attempt they make to explain only highlights the pattern further. Every defense sharpens the exposure. You might be wondering what you're supposed to do next. The answer is simple. Whatever you want. The power is back in your hands because you're no longer reacting, you're choosing. That's the shift. Another quote, just to drive it home: when lies lose their audience, they die fast. And their audience is gone. What's trampling them now isn't you. It's their own history, their own words, their own decisions replaying without filters. The universe didn't need your help. It just needed consistency, and you gave it that by continuing forward instead of getting dragged into the mess. So take this as your final reminder. You're not imagining the shift. You didn't get lucky. You didn't need revenge. You stayed solid long enough for reality to correct itself. Your name stands, their story collapsed, and the truth won without you lifting a finger. That's vindication. Number 11. Close this chapter and don't look back. This is where you stop replaying the story and start owning the ending. Not because you need closure from anyone else, but because you finally have clarity. The fog lifted, the confusion burned off. What's left is truth, steady and quiet, standing where the chaos used to be. You don't need to convince anyone anymore. That season is over. The people who needed proof got it. The people who ignored it revealed themselves. And the ones who mattered saw enough to change how they move around you. That's not something you force. That's something that happens when reality takes over. There's a strange peace that comes after vindication. Not excitement, not celebration. Peace. The kind that comes when you realize you're safe now. Safe from the narrative. Safe from the lies. Safe from carrying something that was never yours to begin with. You didn't lose anything real in this process. You lost illusions, and that's always a gain. If you're feeling oddly calm, that's normal. Vindication doesn't feel like fireworks. It feels like exhaling after holding your breath for too long. It feels like sleeping without your guard up. It feels like no longer rehearsing conversations in your head that you'll never have. Here's something important to understand as you move forward. You don't owe anyone access just because the truth is out. You don't owe reconciliation. You don't owe explanations. You don't owe forgiveness on a schedule that makes other people comfortable. Healing doesn't rush. It chooses. Imagine finishing a long, exhausting journey and finally setting your bags down. You don't immediately sprint into the next race. You stand still. You let your body catch up to your mind. That's where you are right now. Let yourself be there. The universe didn't flip this situation for drama. It corrected it so you could move forward clean, without doubt, without second-guessing yourself, without wondering if you were wrong for trusting your instincts. You weren't. And now you know that for sure. What comes next isn't about proving anything. It's about building quietly, choosing better rooms, better people, better environments, ones that don't require you to shrink, explain, or stay silent to belong. You've already seen what happens when you tolerate too much. You don't need that lesson again. So close this chapter with intention, not bitterness, not anger, just clarity. Take what you learned, leave what hurt you, and step forward lighter than you were before. You were vindicated, they were exposed, and you're free to write the next part however you want. That's the real win. And before you go, chosen one, take 1 second to anchor this moment. If this message brought you clarity, validation, or peace, press the like button if you haven't already. It helps this truth reach the people who need it most. And if you're still not part of this family, make sure to press the subscribe button now. This space is for those who see through illusions and choose growth over noise. Stay connected, stay aware, and trust your instincts. The universe doesn't make mistakes, and neither did you by being here. We move forward together.